This is a lesson to discuss the cognitive explanations of offending behaviour. The cognitive explanation looks at how thinking and moral reasoning affect our behaviour. We all have morals, and morals usually guide our behaviour. If we think back to the cognitive approach from first year, we think about the mind being built as a computer with input, process, output. Input, thought process, output. So now we're looking at the idea that criminals think differently to non-criminals, and that criminals morally reason differently, so perhaps have different morals. We're going to start by looking at the cognitive distortion view. This is an idea that people have different distortions in the way that they think, and is a form of irrational thinking. We have seen this when we've looked at depression. Distortions are misrepresentations of the world. When the world becomes distorted, we don't view it as it really is. So distortions are the ways that reality has become twisted. We don't actually see what's true. For this part of the course, we need to draw on the locus of control. This is something that we looked at in the first year of the course. And this is the idea that people either have an internal or an external locus of control. The first cognitive distortion that we're going to focus on is egocentric bias. When we think of egocentrism, possibly think about Freud with ego defense mechanisms, but when we think about centric, we should think about ourselves. So being egocentric is being self-absorbed and focused on ourselves. One of the cognitive distortions is the emphasis on our own needs rather than the needs of other people. You need to think of an example of criminal behaviour to demonstrate this. For example, thinking that you need to be recognised for your crimes could be one example. Or feeling that you need to steal something because you need it. An example, an addict stealing methadone from a chemist. They would justify this in a distorted way, believing that they needed this and therefore it was completely justified in doing so. In the same respect, it might be that they were looking after their own business, for example, and stole money because they needed it for their business. So this is an example of egocentric bias. The next one is causal attributions. We need to be aware of causal attributions. An attribution is something that we've looked at in first year, and it's the idea of cause and effect, looking at the locus of control and where we put the blame. Lots of criminals will put the blame on somebody else. So a causal attribution would be not taking responsibility and having an external locus of control. So for example, blaming somebody else for making you angry, somebody else for making you annoyed, and therefore that would be the reason that you hit or attacked them. More importantly than these two are the next two cognitive distortions. These are actually named on the specification, which we need to be aware of. The first one is hostile attribution bias. We now know what an attribution bias is because it's when people blame something or somebody else. But a hostile one is when you assume the worst, make negative interpretations of somebody else's behaviour. And this tends to lead to more aggressive behaviour. So this could be somebody saying, they looked at me funny, or I could see the way that they were behaving towards me, they were going to cause a fight with me, they were going to kick off with me, those kind of things where you assume that other people are being negative towards you. Again, lots of criminals show these distortions. The final one is minimization. I suppose this is similar to trivializing, but this is where criminals will under-exaggerate the consequences of a situation. So, for example, a child molester might believe that they were befriending a child and that it wasn't a sexual crime, it was all about affection and care. These would be ways of minimalising. Similarly, you might say, well, I didn't hit somebody that hard. These 4 cognitive distortions you must be fully aware of. So therefore, you need to know how all of these 4 cognitive distortions explain offending behaviour, but in particular, hostile attribution bias and minimalisation. You will need research to support these 2. We'll come on to this later. This demonstrates the difference that people place on interpretation of situations. If you hypothetically ask some correctional counsellors why people committed crimes, inmates committed crimes, they would probably attribute it internally to the person. So they would say, well, they're aggressive in nature, that's what they're like. But if we ask the actual criminal, they're more likely to blame external forces. For example, they might say, I was abused as a child. This would be an example of a causal attribution bias. Hostile attribution bias is the tendency to interpret the behaviour of others across situations as threatening or aggressive. People who show this will constantly misinterpret behaviour as being hostile. They will constantly be quite paranoid, constantly believe that some other people are out to get them. This is an example of an exam question. Please write down this exam question. This is the type of question that you could be asked. Outline 1 cognitive distortion shown by offenders who attempt to justify their crime. This would carry a total of 2 marks. In order to answer this question, you would need to touch on one of 2 possible cognitive distortions. The mark scheme suggests minimization and hostile attribution bias. Again, please make them absolutely relevant to criminal behaviour. Don't just talk about what minimization is. Make sure that it's clearly linked to offender behaviour. Another exam question that you could be asked is an apply it question. Read this question. You will have been emailed with a sheet. Highlight the areas that explain what is meant by cognitive distortions. You should aim to be looking at certain areas of the STEM that demonstrate the different cognitive distortions. This is an AO2 application question, so you must quote psychology and items from the STEM. This is a 4-mark question. There are 3 issues in this that you could pick out. The first is when questioned by police, Max claimed he punched the man in the bar because he looked at me funny. This is a clear example of hostile attribution bias. This is because he has made a negative interpretation of what the guy in the bar was doing. Again, he's failed to take responsibility. The next sentence is an example of minimalisation. This is where Max tells the judge in court that he wasn't even hurt that bad. This is playing down the damage that is caused and minimising totally his crime, almost making it justifiable because it wasn't a big deal. The final part is a little bit trickier, and this demonstrates egocentric bias. What was I supposed to do? I was just taking care of business. This is self-focused and self-absorbed. I committed the crime because I had to, for me. If you referred to these 3 areas, this should give you 4 marks, as long as you link the psychology with the STEM. Next, you need to have a look at page 269 of your textbook and annotate and evaluate research that supports the cognitive distortions. There's a sheet to go with this that talks about Looking at research studies, there are 4 research studies on this sheet, and you must explain whether the research studies support and which particular cognitive distortion they support. There are 4 pieces of research here. The first 2 you will find. The first one, Schonenberg and Justy, supports the idea of hostile attribution bias. You must have a piece of research to support this. There's a second study here looking at children. And again, this demonstrates hostile attribution bias. The next 2 studies demonstrate minimization. The first one, by Barberie, is looking at 26 convicted rapists. 54% denied that they had committed an offence at all. 40% completely minimised the harm that they had caused the victim. This is clearly an example of the cognitive distortion minimisation, and therefore supports the idea that this exists. The final one is a bit trickier, but relates to child sexual offences. Again, 35% of a sample of child molesters said that the crime that they had committed was non-sexual. 36% said that the victim had consented. Again, this is minimalising a very serious crime and passing it off as affection. You will find, if you have a look in the textbook, that there is more research and more evaluation here. You can do this in your own time. That ends the section on cognitive distortions. The specification states that we must be aware of 2 areas of cognitive psychology. The first is cognitive distortions, the second is moral reasoning, and we're going to turn to the work of a guy called Lawrence Kohlberg. Lawrence Kohlberg is one of the main moral reasoning psychologists. He's classed as a developmental psychologist, but we need to understand his work in terms of cognitive psychology. There's a quote from him on the board which we will come back to several times. Kohlberg believes that criminals have a lower level of moral reasoning than others. He believes that criminals do not progress from the first level of moral reasoning. He believes that they are unable to reason at higher levels and sympathise with the rights of others. We would justify not committing a crime because of the harm it would cause to other people. Kohlberg believes that violent criminals are unable to do this and are either stuck or have regressed back to one of the previous stages. We learn moral reasoning as a child. I will go through this on the next slide. You could draw parallels with Freud's theory with this, the idea of regressing back to a stage. So, this is Kohlberg's theory. You will notice that there are 3 levels and 6 stages. Please try not to learn this in full. You will never be asked to recite this. You just need to be able to refer to it and understand it. So Kohlberg states that there are 3 levels of moral reasoning. The first level, level 1, is the pre-morality. The pre-morality is where punishment and obedience are focused on. People tend to do what is right because of fear of punishment. This is very childlike. This is one of the first things that we learn in terms of moral reasoning as a child. And then we eventually learn that if we perhaps tidy our room or put things away, we might be given a reward. You learn at school that you might get a star or a sticker for good behaviour. Again, this would be classed as stage 2. Then we move on to level 2, which is classed as conventional morality. Again, please ensure that you don't fully learn these stages, that you're just aware of them. This is now taking the morals a bit further, where you do right because you believe it's your duty and it's helping society. You do what the majority of people would do. I would expect that most people would be at level 3, which is post-conventional morality. This is where we are able to reason fully. We are able to understand our own ethical principles, apply universal ethical principles, and understand the principles of justice and equality. we're able to apply this in a range of situations. So, Kohlberg believes that criminals are in level 1. They are pre-morality. So this implies a childlike quality. And the suggestion is that criminals believe that breaking the law here is justified. So they might attack someone because they believe that they deserved it. They justify it in some way. And the idea is that they have either regressed back or they don't fully have strong morals and principles. The next type of criminal would be a level 2 conventional morality stage. These are criminals who believe that what they're doing would help the good of society. So, for example, they believe that whatever they do is justified in some way. So this might be people who act as, who condone vigilante attacks, or perhaps people who believe that the person fully deserved their crime. They might believe that they're doing it to help society in some way. They might believe that they're doing it to get certain people off the street and out of harm's way. You need to be aware that the general population, it's hoped, are in level 3. But according to Kohlberg, criminals are either in level 1 or level 2. You must have some research to support this. So most criminals are likely to be at the pre-conventional level. They believe that breaking the law is justified if the rewards outweigh the punishment. At the conventional level, individuals who commit crimes believe that their behaviour is justified because it helps to maintain society. In order to evaluate this, you need to read pages 332, 333 of your textbook. This is a section from them. You will have been given this in class today, or you will be able to pick it up from me. You will notice here that it says Kohlberg based his theory on people's response to a series of moral dilemmas, such as the Heinz dilemma. You need to have a brief look at the Heinz dilemma. This is in your course booklet, and it is on the chapter out of the textbook. The Heinz dilemma is a dilemma looking at an ethical problem. Kohlberg used this to find out which stage of his moral reasoning stages people were in. It says here, using his moral dilemma technique, he found that a group of violent youths were significantly lower in their moral development than non-violent youths. Some further research here by Chandler, who suggests that individuals who reason at higher levels tend to sympathise more with the rights of others and exhibit more conventional behaviours such as honesty, generosity and non-violence. Please make sure that you have one piece of research to support this theory. As you can see here, this is a 16-mark question. This is a shorter part of the course to the biological approach, and if you have a look at this question, it's describe and discuss cognitive explanations of offending. Refer to at least one other explanation within your answer. So we haven't looked at the other explanations yet, but you could refer to any biological, personality, social, any other theories as well. This takes off the pressure from having to learn too many pieces of research for this. Please ensure that for this question you are able to discuss cognitive distortions and, even if unbalanced, a little bit about Kohlberg's theory of moral reasoning. This ends the session on the cognitive approach. Please refer to your textbook, please make notes on this, and please refer to the PowerPoint. Thank you.